And I wanted to thank all of you tutors for joining us tonight at the end of a long day to listen to Dr. Tanya Christ. She is a professor of reading and language arts at Oakland University. She teaches undergrad, grad, and doctoral students in literacy. And she's particularly interested in teacher development. So we are really lucky to have her here tonight. And I originally reached out to her about doing a workshop on reading comprehension because of a conversation I had with a number of tutors who work with our basic or our native born students who were struggling with comprehension. If they could read a passage and fluently and get the words, they then were struggling to answer questions about it. So that was originally the impetus for her to put together this presentation. She has those kinds of students in mind as opposed to the English language learners, although comprehension is comprehension. I think this is going to be useful to everybody. So having said that, I think Tanya, everybody who's signed in, the sign-ins have slowed down. So if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Well, I'm really excited to spend the next hour with you all. As we go through this workshop together, feel free to turn your microphone on and join in at any time, ask questions, or pop something in the chat. We will, if we have time at the end, come back to some of these other challenges that a few people have posted in the chat so far. But as Lori said, tonight we're going to focus on comprehension methods. Particularly, we're going to start with inference, because inferences can be difficult to make and how to guide students to make inferences from text. We're also going to talk about personal connections to text and how to facilitate students making those. If we have time, we'll talk a little bit about comprehension monitoring as well. For each of these strategies, we'll go through a process together, and I would suggest the same process for you and your students. So the first thing we'll do is I'll model. I'll show you how to use the strategy by thinking aloud. Then we'll do it together, so I'll ask you to participate. If you need some coffee before you're ready to participate, go brew some right now. And then you'll do one in a breakout room with a partner. So you and your partner will try the exact same strategy again. One of you can be the teacher and one of you can be the student. Is everybody ready to participate?
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome. Good, good. I see heads nodding. Excellent. One other thing we're going to do with these comprehension methods is we're going to use graphic organizers. Graphic organizers aren't just a pretty way to show that you're prepared for your lesson. They actually externalize and guide the reader's processing. And so we're using these graphic organizers to help us get through the teaching steps and help the student get through the processing steps. The graphic organizers are really key to this. So for example, here's an inference graphic organizer. So in order to make an inference, we use two kinds of clues. We use text clues and we use background knowledge clues. And then based on those two in combination, we draw an inference. So for example, I'm going to read you this first poem, and then I'm going to think aloud about how I would make an inference based on this. And the inference is going to respond to, what do you think the author would do to build the world anew? Unbeing builders of a new world. A riot's the language of the unheard. Our race besieged has had its dreams deferred. Africa lives on in blood, root, and bone. Yet when we are murdered, our names aren't known. We cannot breathe, in obscurity die, yet march with outrage. We have been denied. Remember, brothers, sisters' lives count too. As equals, we could build this world anew. So first I want to look at the text clues. What text clues might help me figure out what the author would do to build the world anew. So I'm going to look for text clues that tell me what the author thinks about the world right now. And I focus on language like the language of the unheard, dreams deferred, and been denied. And so what I would do is I would start to put these in my boxes. So I'd start to fill in this box first. Language of the unheard, dreams deferred, been denied. These are the text clues that help me think about what the author thinks about the world currently. Additionally, I want to use my background knowledge. And so one thing I know is that the United States has always had issues of equity. So we've always struggled with racial inequity in the US. And so I would add that to my relevant background knowledge box here. And based on knowing these particular things that the author feels about what's been unfair in the United States, and knowing that there have been equity issues in the United States, I would infer that when the author makes a new world, the author will make it more equitable. Anybody have questions about my processing here that I just modeled for you? Yes. There's not a name under your picture, I'm sorry. The gentleman in the red shirt.
No, I was waving to my wife.
Oh, sorry.
She just finished. She just finished her yogi session, so I was just waving to her.
Okay. No questions about that? Okay, so now
I have a question.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
So I was following the text clues, but where you said the background knowledge, I don't know that I saw that in the text.
Yes, that's a great point. So the text clues come from the text, the background knowledge come from in your head. So they have to be things you already know. So as people were logging on, we were talking about building background knowledge, and sometimes we need to use videos or discussions, photographs, other ways of building background knowledge that will be needed to make inferences. So if you're using a text and you think the student may not have the requisite background knowledge in order to make the inference, you might want to use some techniques before reading the text to build the background knowledge. The other thing you can do is when you're reading the text, if they're struggling to make an inference, you can build the background knowledge at that point if you didn't realize ahead of time that you needed to. Oftentimes with students, I search right there in the middle of the lesson for either a photograph, a video, a text that I can read to them, something that will help fill in that background knowledge that seems to be missing if I didn't know ahead of time to prepare for that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you talking about crystallized intelligence as applied to adult education versus biological intelligence as applied to pediatric intelligence, pedagogy, whatever, andragogy versus pedagogy? I'm sorry, it's a very important element for me, the person I'm dealing with in this situation, and I find it rather complex.
This is strategic processing. So I mean, everyone has intelligence that they use. It will help both processing, and it also affects background knowledge. But we're not talking about intelligence, which is not something that's
no. Crystallized intelligence is based on what I have, as an adult learner, I have learned about things in life. It's nothing to do with intelligence as such. It's to do with what I know. If you are, as an educator, give me information as an adult, i.e. crystallized intelligence, I am going to question what you tell me. As a maybe a 19-year-old student, biological intelligence, I don't question what you tell me. And this is where I have a problem with the relevant texts and so on. I'm sorry, I'm just sort of missing the ball here, as they say.
I'm sorry, I'm not following what your question is probably well enough. I'm hearing you say that people
relevant background knowledge is the same as crystallized intelligence for an adult learner, meaning that I have learned so much in my life because I am an adult, and when you give me information, I am questioning what you're telling me. Does that make sense? And if I were an ESL learner,
I'm not sure why
I don't know where I'm coming from.
I'm not sure I understand the question yet, because both children and adults have background knowledge, and both can
Not the same, not the same.
well, sure, they have different life experiences, but are you not sure that background knowledge is relevant for adults? Is that what you're asking?
No, absolutely. I think background knowledge is very relevant for adult learners, because we are dealing with adult learners here. Does anybody else have anything to say about the difference between pedagogy and andragogy? Adult learning versus young people's learning.
Well, this is Lori. We're not talking about childhood reading here tonight. Why don't we let Dr. Christ continue, and maybe at the end we can loop back with you and see if it's become clearer.
Okay. Thank you. It's just a very meaningful thing to me, because I'm dealing with a very challenging student at the moment.
I would be happy to talk more with you about it at the end.
Well, thank you. I apologize if I interrupted your train of talking, so I will back off. Thank
I'd
you.
be happy to talk about it with you later more.
Okay, thank
so
you.
Maybe I can understand what you're.
It means a lot. It means a lot.
All right, and are there any other questions? Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah, Miriam?
Yes, that poem seems very advanced for a new learner. I mean, it would take me a while to read it and understand it.
Right. I think there's two things. One is, for the sake of practicing, it's got to be a little difficult, or you don't really need the strategy. So I thought for us to practice, it would be good to have some meaty, weighty kinds of poetry and lyrics to play with tonight. But also something that you can do with your students is read aloud to them, because beginning readers can only read text that's so difficult. It may be very easy to make an inference or a connection with that really, really simple text, but it might be more difficult as the text gets harder. So it's good to practice the strategies with more difficult text to build that capability. So you would want to use a text that is appropriate for their developmental level. So a text that's appropriate for an adult. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But you said reading to the student. I have my student read to me.
Right, and that's really helpful for word recognition and fluency development, but sometimes it's not adequate for comprehension and vocabulary development, because sometimes the concepts and the vocabulary words aren't complex enough to be able to practice the strategies with those really simple texts. It depends on what level the student is reading at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my student's reading is a high level of reading. She's reading Pride and Prejudice right now. It's got a lot of words that she doesn't understand.
Great, so then this kind of poem would work.
Yeah.
Other questions? Renee? No? Okay, so the next one we're going to try together. So the idea is to go through the same strategic process with the student. So we're going to answer together the question, what do you think the author thinks the purpose of speech is? And so The Thought of the World by Nick Morris. What was the virtue of speech? Had there not been a world to uphold and a mind to think, of worlds that were not itself? And so in order to answer this question, what are some of the relevant text clues that might help you? What are some of the clues written right there in the text that might help you answer the question, what do you think the author thinks the purpose of speech is?
Well, I think right in the title, the word thought.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thought might be something that we would write in the relevant text clues box.
Yeah.
What else? What other text clues are there?
Mind to think.
Yeah,
Virtue,
mm-hmm.
the virtue of speech.
Yeah, virtue. Great. Any other ideas?
Well, there's a world to uphold. In other words, a world that we're supposed to help take care of.
Yes.
And so we need to speak.
Excellent. And so all of those ideas could go right in that relevant text clues box. And then the next step is to think about, what do we know about the world? What background knowledge do we have that might help us answer this question about what the author thinks the purpose of speech is?
Are there any guiding questions that you might ask a student to help link the text clues to the background knowledge?
Yeah,
Or is it just kind of a brainstorming?
you definitely could ask more direct questions if that's needed in order to link the two together, or in order to find the text clues. So you all found the text clues fairly easily and identified good text clues. Did you need to go to bed?
My tooth's Water break.
Sorry. But if a student didn't readily identify those text clues, you could go line by line and think about what words or phrases from those lines might help us think about that. So we might do some more fine-grained kind of guidance. Or if something was suggested that didn't make sense, we might say something like, can you tell me more about that to better understand the student's thinking? And then we might ask a linking question of, well, how is that related to the author's purpose for speech? So definitely, there could be some follow-up questions, particularly if the student is struggling to identify relevant text clues. Does that help a little?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
Great, great. So what's some relevant background knowledge we might have related to the, what the author thinks the purpose of speech is?
Well, we have lived in the world and we have seen its problems.
Mm-hmm.
The world is diverse. There's many different types of speech
Mm-hmm.
in the world.
Consciousness to think of worlds.
Say more about that.
Well, it's saying that to be able to imagine worlds that are not ourselves, that are outside of ourselves.
Oh.
Yeah, that might not exist yet. So something doesn't exist yet.
Or like when you're a child, all you know is what's inside of you, and then a consciousness of the world, I guess I would say, is background knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking another word for speech is communication. That's background knowledge.
Yeah. So when we think about the relevant text clues and we think about our background knowledge, and we start to think about those two sets of clues together, what can we infer about what the author thinks the purpose of speech is? Oh, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Communicate your thoughts.
Yeah, so to communicate your thoughts, and what kind of thoughts might the author think you should be communicating based on some of those relevant text clues that we were talking about?
I think you're supposed to think somewhat outside the box. You're supposed to think about worlds that are not your own. Go beyond yourself type thing.
Yeah, going beyond the status quo. And in what kind of direction? What kind of focus? What did the text clues suggest about the kind of focus we should have in our thinking and our communication that thinks outside of the box?
Mind.
more about that.
An open mind.
Okay, so having an open mind. What about that word virtue? Remember when we were first talking about the text clues? Somebody mentioned that virtue was important. How do you think that's important in inferring what the author thinks we should communicate about to expand beyond our current ways of being in the world?
Well, a virtue is something that's good. So the implication is that speech should be doing something good. And that goes with the word uphold too. Seems like a positive idea for speech.
Yeah, good connection.
Mhm.
So when we put all of those ideas together, we're communicating about a world that hasn't been created yet that would hold virtue, right? Something that would be more virtuous than the current world we have, envisioning and then communicating that kind of world. Anybody have questions about going through this process together or thoughts they want to share?
I do have a thought.
Yeah.
The lady that I deal with at the moment, her virtue of speech is when I ask her a question, she has her daughter or son sitting next to her, and everything is translated into Arabic. And then I try to bring everything back and I ask her to speak to me. That's a very, you talk about virtue of speech. It's a very tough situation. How would you deal with that yourself, please?
We actually were just doing a research study with some adult ESL learners, and we were doing the same thing. So we were talking about books, and their children were translating for us. I think being able to have someone translate provides some bootstrapping in terms of being able to understand the English and the text, be able to communicate when otherwise that might not be possible. Simultaneously, it's nice to be able to also encourage the use of some English language as well. Excuse me, as much as is possible.
And it's good that she has the support of her family, which is great. And she has responded to my questions in writing, although I don't know how much help she gets from her family, but at least she's answering my questions. But it's so challenging. And you talk about virtue of speech, everything goes south. Does that make sense?
If I could break in here, it seems to me that you should have some time with just the lady and not the child translating everything. Because otherwise she's always going to depend on that child.
She won't do it.
She won't?
Nope. Nope.
Well, maybe hang in there for a while, I guess.
I'm only on session number 7 with her.
There's actually a lot of research that supports translanguage.
Yeah, I am really working on this one, and I found subjects that she loves, such as embroidery. So she is really, she lit up when I gave her questions about Syrian embroidery, and I asked her to read to me. So it's something I tried to light up a fire for her. But I tell you what, it's so good to speak to other tutors to understand. It's just, I want to help her.
What level is she?
Very, very low.
Isabel, it's Lori again. I'd like to call you tomorrow to talk about
Absolutely, I would love that.
With your student. The focus tonight is really on reading comprehension, but you and I can talk more about dealing with translate.
All right, I understand. I will not detract anymore. I'll just keep my mouth shut and just listen.
So Isabel, just one more thing to share with you about your student. The translanguaging that happens where the student is switching between English and Arabic with the help of her children, research actually shows that translanguaging is quite helpful in terms of improving language development and facilitating comprehension. So I
Thank
think
you.
a lot of that translanguaging can be a really positive thing.
Thank you. I appreciate your input.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so the next inference task is one for you to do in a breakout room with a partner. And so what you'll do is you'll read the poem, you'll practice, one of you will be the tutor and one will be the student. You'll practice identifying the relevant text clues, the relevant background knowledge, and then what you can infer based on that. And then when we come back, you'll have 5 minutes in the breakout room. And when we come back, we'll share what the experience was like and whatever questions you may have as well.
Dr. Christ, can you put that text in the chat window so they can still see it when they go into the breakout room?
Sure.
I know they did get the copy of the presentation, but I don't know if everybody had a chance to download it.
Well, I think I can take a screenshot and then put that in the chat window. Let me try that.
Try it. No.
And then you want them in rooms with just one other person?
Yeah, just pairs of two, a tutor 2D simulation.
Okay, great.
Thank you. In just 5 minutes.
Okay, you will get a message to join a breakout room, and then you'll have 5 minutes there.
We
The chat now. Okay, so the first step we'd start with is we would
we went through it and we both agreed that this would be difficult for our students based on this poem itself. Perhaps, fortunate for me, my session is tomorrow with my student. We're reading about Benedict Arnold, and I'm gonna try this strategy, but I'm thinking I'm gonna ask her questions. I don't know that she would understand what can I infer. If I said something like that to her, I don't know that she would fully comprehend what I'm asking her. So we read those who, what, were books. I read the introduction part, which is a couple of pages. I think I'll try this strategy after I read that introduction, asking her for text clues, and just to see how we can get through this, just as a trial run. And hopefully we can, and then what background information does she know? Because she selected the book. And because she selected the book, then do she know who Benedict Arnold was up front? Is it her reason for selecting it? Something like that. I can probably go, that route.
Yeah, I was suggesting that you use the examples from our PowerPoint tonight necessarily with your students, but really it was to practice the strategic process. So you can use the graphic organizer. If you want to change the language on the graphic organizer, you could say word clues if you wanted to. Things I know, things in the book could be another way of putting down relevant text clues. and instead of inferring what I can figure out. So you can change the language on the graphic organizer if you think that that will be helpful. I would introduce the word infer at some point. So you might practice it with simpler language and then say, well, what we've been doing is we've been making inferences. Inferences are what we can figure out based on what the book says and what we know about the world. But yeah, absolutely, you can modify that a little bit, especially the language, in order to make it work better for your student. That's a good point.
So from this, sorry.
Go ahead.
From this paragraph, what would you infer? It was hard to figure out.
I would prefer that the lynching black bodies hanging from the trees, from the popular trees, is what the text clues and along with the background is telling me that this poem.
That's what I inferred, but I wasn't sure whether I was on the right track. So I just wanted to, yes.
Yeah, so because the blood from the leaves and the blood at the root.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important that in order to be able to make the inference, you have to have the background knowledge about lynchings, particularly in the South. And so without that kind of relevant background knowledge, you might not be able to make the inference. So that would be a case where you might need to build background knowledge if you didn't have it already.
It would almost be a history lesson.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions before we move on to the next strategy?
So it's very subtle though. So if somebody doesn't have a background knowledge, it would be hard to figure out, right?
Yes, absolutely. So that's why when we were talking previously about background knowledge, if you know your student doesn't have the necessary background knowledge for the inferences in the text you're using, you'd build background knowledge before reading. If you don't realize until you're reading that they don't have the needed background knowledge, then you'd stop and build it. When you're trying to fill in that relevant background knowledge box, you might have to get some videos, some photographs, some other text that you can read aloud in order to develop some of that background knowledge. Okay, so the next strategy is going to be making connections. And so here's another graphic organizer for you. First, we focus on kinds of text clues that you can connect with. And we're going to focus on self-connections because self-connections are the easiest kind of connections to make. So you can make connections to yourself, to other books, to the world. Self-connections are the easiest of the three for most people. And so usually we start with self-connections first. And so I'll model with this first poem, Underdog. She was walking in the street, looked up and noticed. He was nameless. He was homeless. She asked him his name and told him what hers was. He gave her a story about a life with a glint in his eye and a corner of a smile. One conversation, a simple moment, the things that change us if we notice. When we look up sometimes, they said I would never make it, but it was built to break the mold. The only dream that I've been chasing is my own. So I sing a song for the hustlers trading at the bus stop, single mothers waiting on a check to come, young teachers, students, doctors, sons on the front line knowing they don't get to run. This goes out to the underdog. Keep on keeping at what you love. You'll find that someday, soon enough, you will rise up, yeah. And so when I started this, remember we're going to go through the steps in the graphic organizer. First, I'm going to talk about what resonated with me personally in the poem. And so this blue text that I have highlighted here for you, those were the lines that really resonated with me personally. Breaking the mold, particularly, and chasing my own dream really resonated with me as well. And so I would put those in the first box. And I liked to use this format, or you can use this format. They're two different graphic organizers. You can just choose which way you like to display it visually. And the connection that I made was I have a family who expected I would be traditional and get married and have a family. And instead, I got a PhD and had a career and adopted my daughter when I was over 40. So I kind of did it much, much differently than what's traditional in my own kind of family. So that was the connection that I made using those steps, first text clues, then how it applies directly to my life. Okay, so now we're going to look at this next poem, and we're going to think about the text clues that really resonate with you. What are the words that really resonate with you in this poem? And then the second step is, what's a specific thing in your life that has happened that you can connect to with those resonating words? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to read the poem and think about what words resonate with you, step one, and then what your connection is, step two. And when you're ready to share, you can just go ahead and share with us.
Oh, nice.
So, Chris, were there some words there that resonated with you? Were there some phrases?
Oh, yes, there were.
Go ahead and share a couple with us.
Yeah, so I guess just recently, you know, this one where it says, I've learned that making a living is not the same as making a life. I've learned that life sometimes gives you a second chance. I've learned that you shouldn't go through life with a catcher's miss on both hands. I really like that one.
Okay, so that resonated with you. Can you make a personal connection to your life that's related to those words?
Well, yeah, I just recently quit my job in October and took a big risk, and I'm going to start something new in January, traveling as a travel therapist. And there's a lot of unknown, but I feel like I'm just interested in giving something back, but also getting something in return, and not just doing the grind. So
well, congratulations. And that's also a great example of finding the resonating language and then making a personal connection.
Yes.
Anybody else have words that really resonated with them?
I've also, the other one, the last paragraph, I've learned that people will forget what you said and forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel.
Mm.
So I think that is also very important.
So that really resonated with you. Can you make a personal life connection to that? Has anyone ever done something to you, not so much with their words, but by their actions that really made an unforgettable impression?
Well, I guess this is just a common thing, but when I was really very sick, and sometimes the get well cards which came, some of them were they were so heartfelt that it made me cry. And I didn't realize that words had so much meaning. So that was just my personal experience, but it touched me a lot.
But that act of sending those cards with really meaningful
Yes.
words was something that was unforgettable.
Yeah.
Good connection. Anybody else have some words that resonate?
The first paragraph, no matter what happens or how bad it seems today, life goes on and it will be better tomorrow. I've had a lot of losses in my family, And that struck me as experience does prove that life goes on.
I'm so sorry for your losses.
Thank you.
Same here.
That's also an excellent connection too, as well. All right, we're going to do one more breakout room.
May I please ask one thing?
Sure.
Chris.
Yes.
Chris Julian. Were you a speech therapist?
I am her.
You looked after my husband.
Yes.
Rick.
That's me.
Oh my God. I cannot believe we have made a big meeting today.
Yeah.
You were wonderful.
Why, thank you.
So the last.
No, I'm sorry. We just made a connection. I didn't believe it. It's very special, very special.
So our last breakout room is going
I'm
to.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's okay. So the last breakout room we're going to read this poem, Rise Up by Andra Day. It's actually a song. And you find the words that resonate with you, and then the personal connections or disconnections if you don't connect with the words in the poem. And so one of you will be the tutor and one of you will be the tutee. If you don't have the PDF, one thing you can do is just take a screenshot of this right now. You can just take a picture from your device of the screen right now before you go into the breakout room.
Tanya, I just copied and pasted into the chat room as well.
Thanks, Lori. All right, so we'll do maybe 3 or 4 minutes in the breakout room, and then we'll come back and debrief a little bit again like we did last time.
All right, I'm going to open the breakout rooms. Hello, do you mind if I join your breakout room?
We're back.
Okay, so what were some of the experiences as you were trying this 2-step strategic process for making connections? What were some of the things that you noticed or had questions about?
We have so much in common.
Can you say more about that?
We wanted to help somebody because we've been there.
That was the connection you made with the poem?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else with questions or comments about using the process?
I think it's important that you model for your students when you find a connection to the piece of literature by showing or telling a little bit more than you might in another situation, a lot about the emotional and maybe the social and maybe even the physical reaction you get. I went to the fruit business looking, I don't know anything about fruit. I'm not a gardener. I first on a first read, blood fruit. And then I said, oh, the only one I know is orange. And then when I read the poem for the third time, I said, oh, this is a hurtful telling. This is sad. And historically painful. So I went from saying, you know, on a quick read, that's what you do sometimes. You read quickly and then you don't touch it. You don't go there with the text.
You're talking about the Inference poem, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And you just don't even notice that you're not doing that. And then suddenly something grabs you and then it bursts into a meaningful experience. And that has to be shared. The student can see, oh, you saw all that, you recognize all that, you felt that way. That's a training of how they can share with you what they felt, what they experienced.
And those are all parts of the background knowledge that you're talking about there,
Right.
too.
You really have to work to build that prior knowledge.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments about the experience practicing with the making connections?
And this one, it seems like it relates very much to nowadays with the pandemic and staying inside and going on the same thing every day.
Yeah, for me, it really spoke to perseverance. But that's another perspective too, is that the way we connect or the way we infer can be somewhat different, but still appropriate because of our different kinds of background knowledge too. Particularly our emotional responses to different poems based on our different kinds of background knowledge.
Right.
Well, I always over prepare so that we have never run out of things to talk about, but it doesn't look like we're going to have time tonight to talk about text structure and monitoring, but I will just tell you that when you get your PowerPoints, you will see more graphic organizers at the end of the PowerPoint that we didn't get to. And they first show expository text structure, and those are ways you can guide your student through paying attention to what's important in an expository text while you read. So the key with comprehension monitoring is you have to do it while you're reading. Don't fill out the graphic organizer after you're done reading. It has to happen during so that you can repair misunderstanding when it occurs while you're reading the text. And then I also popped in a few graphic organizers for narrative text as well. Go to bed.
Mary, go around.
She's looking for a little attention, I can tell. Sometimes I'm on research team meetings and she knows who's on the meeting. Gigi, you need to go to bed. Thank you. All right, so expository and narrative text structures. If you're having difficulty with your student understanding as they read and doing literal kinds of retelling. I know that we don't have time left for me to answer additional questions, but if it's all right with Lori, I would be happy to stay on longer and try and answer some of those questions for you. I'm sure some of you have other commitments and probably need to log off. Lori, is that something that we can do for?
Sure, certainly. Thank you so much for your presentation, and all of you. I mean, you have access on that email I sent you today to download all of her slides, so you get the rest of those graphic organizers.
Yeah, those are helpful.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
I have to leave, but thank you.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you, Lori.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Anyone have additional questions they'd like to stay and ask?
I have one big thing.
Sure.
You have put Chris, Julian, and me in contact with each other again. It was a very meaningful thing because she helped me through many situations with my husband who died about 14 years ago. And he was a stroke victim, and she helped him so much. She was amazing.
Well, that's good to hear, Isabel.
I just wanted to share that with you. So Chris, I have your phone number and I will call you.
I think she logged off, but.
No, but I will call her.
Mhm.
That was so meaningful. I cannot believe it. This is something from the powers that be.
Glad you could
Small
make
world.
them.
Does anybody have any other questions for Dr. Christ?
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Dr. Christ, for a very meaningful meeting.
Very welcome, Isabella.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Lori.
All right. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, Lori. Thank you too.
Thank you, Dr. Chris.
If it's too big of an issue or not, but I don't know if you have any quick words of advice when a student can read at a great